Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about the Mussen Building and Environs. With over 500 documented ghost stories, Montreal is easily the most haunted city in Canada, if not all of North America. Haunted Montreal is dedicated to researching these paranormal tales, and our channel brings you new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. To wrap up 2024, we examine a deranged story about the Mussen Building and its environs in Old Montreal. But before we get into today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you get notified every time we have a new tale to share. And hey, if you are already subscribed, a big thank you, welcome back, I'm happy to see you again. Now without further ado, let's get spooky. In the heart of Old Montreal, the Mussen Building makes an odd impression. Positioned at the corner of Notre Dame Street and Saint Laurent Boulevard, its modern fast food restaurant clashes with the surrounding historic neighborhood. The building and its area have a reputation for being haunted. A local history professor, whom we will call Professor V, reached out to Haunted Montreal to share his eerie experience at an Airbnb unit just west of the Mussen Building. Professor V, who wishes to remain anonymous, had to find temporary housing after a major flood at his home on September 13th in 2022. That day, over 60 millimeters of rain fell by 7 p.m., overwhelming the sewers and causing them to backflow into basements, particularly below Sherbrooke Street. When Professor V returned from teaching, he discovered filthy sewer water creeping up from the floorboards of his basement unit. His insurance company informed him that the floors would need replacing, so he began searching for an Airbnb that allowed cats, of course. He was thrilled to find a loft in Old Montreal, a place that felt like the perfect temporary home for someone so passionate about history. When he arrived, he was charmed by the loft's old-world atmosphere. The large windows offered a view of Notre Dame Street, where a heritage building was being restored. Inside, there was a king-size Murphy bed, a fully stocked kitchen, and a deep bathtub for soaking. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. The professor and his cat enjoyed quiet evenings watching snow fall outside or playing with toys. But after sunset, things started to change. Each night, his cat grew restless. It hissed and growled at nothing, then chased and pounced on invisible targets. As the days passed, Professor V grew increasingly disturbed by his experiences. He began having a recurring nightmare of a man in a medieval leather mask visiting him in a dark dungeon-like room with stone walls. The details were unclear, but the sense of danger was undeniable. In these dreams, the professor always felt threatened. Each morning, he would wake up in a cold sweat, only to hear his cat hissing and darting around the loft as if battling unseen forces. This strange routine repeated night after night, and the professor found himself losing sleep, which began affecting his behavior during history lectures. Some days, he struggled to stay awake at the podium. Other days, he snapped at students for asking simple questions. Desperate to understand what was happening, Professor V started researching the building. He was a skeptic, not easily swayed by talk of the supernatural. But the strange events were taking a toll on his mental health. He couldn't dismiss the nightmares or the unsettling behavior of his cat. Yet, speaking publicly about his experiences would jeopardize his standing as a respected historian. So he insisted on remaining anonymous. The professor turned to online historical databases, hoping to find a clue. He quickly discovered that the building was constructed in 1859 as a storehouse for the Port of Montreal. It was typical of the era. Shops occupied the ground floor, with the upper floors used for storage. Curious, he dug further into the site's history and uncovered something unsettling. The building had sat vacant in 1856, following a fire that destroyed Montreal's first Anglican cathedral. Christ Church, built in 1814, had once been the heart of Montreal's Anglican diocese. After the fire, the cathedral relocated to its current location downtown. Professor V discovered that some of the surviving walls from the original cathedral had been incorporated into the building housing his Airbnb. He confirmed this when he walked around the block and saw the lower portion of the back wall made from hand-chiseled limestone blocks. Curious, he wondered if the stonework had anything to do with the strange happenings in his unit. Could the remains of a haunted cathedral be causing the disturbances? He contacted officials at the Anglican Church, but they insisted their buildings, old and new, were not haunted. However, they did acknowledge one exception, their red roof church, which was said to have a friendly ghost. Unsatisfied, Professor V pressed on with his research. One day, while walking past the Mussen Building, he noticed a plaque mentioning that Jacques Archambault, a colonist, had lived there in 1651. Intrigued, he shifted his focus to the Mussen Building, which now housed a McDonald's. There was something about the place that just felt off. The building, constructed between 1904 and 1905, was designed by the architectural firm McVicker and Harriet and commissioned by the estate of Thomas Mussen. It replaced an earlier structure that had been the site of Mussen's wholesale business in fabrics, haberdashery, and dry goods. By the 1920s, National Cash Register and Leeming Miles Company, a pharmaceutical and food wholesaler, became the building's primary tenants. In 1925, Henry Miles, president of Leeming Miles Company, purchased the building, but the company vacated in the early 1950s. Determined to learn more, Professor V visited the McDonald's to ask the staff about any paranormal activity. While the employees and manager stayed silent, a regular overheard his questions and approached him. "Sometimes when it's quiet in the morning," she said, "I hear what sounds like heavy chains being dragged." As Professor V dug deeper, he uncovered something even more disturbing. The site where his Airbnb stood had once been home to notorious prisons dating back to the New France era. Built around 1684, these prisons were basic and brutal. Inmates were given little more than a crust of stale bread and a jug of murky water while they waited for interrogation, or worse. There were 4 main types of crimes in the New France colonies. Crimes against the state included treason, smuggling, and resisting a legal officer. Crimes against property covered theft, arson, and desertion. Crimes against the person included murder, rape, and poisoning. But the most severe offenses were crimes against the church: adultery, bigamy, prostitution, sorcery, and blasphemy. Anyone accused of these crimes was brought before Le Bureau, the torturer who used a device called Le Brodequin, or the Spanish boot. This device consisted of 2 wooden planks attached to the legs, tightly bound with rope. The torturer would begin with La question ordinaire, 4 questions designed to force a confession. If the prisoner didn't answer, he would insert a wedge between the boards, one at a time, until the bone was crushed. Most prisoners confessed before the 4th wedge, but the damage was severe. If they survived, the torturer would move on to the extraordinaire, using 8 wedges. Once the confession was obtained, the criminal was dressed in a long white robe, and a sign bearing their crime was hung around their neck. They were paraded through the streets on a horse-drawn cart, first stopping at the church to beg forgiveness. Then they were taken to the Place du Marché, where executions were carried out by hanging, burning at the stake, or being broken alive on the torture wheel. The wheel was a large horizontal structure where the condemned's limbs were smashed with a hammer one by one until death inevitably followed. For the most severe crimes, punishment was even more gruesome. The criminal would be tied to the center of the square with ropes attached to their arms and legs. The ropes were then stretched to the corners of the square, where they were tied to horses. At the torturer's signal, the horses pulled the criminal in 4 directions. The torturer would then use a sword to slice open the victim's belly, spilling their intestines for the crowd's viewing pleasure. Professor V couldn't determine when the colonial prison was demolished, but he suspected it was after the British conquest in 1760. Given the horrific history of the Mussen Building site, he began to connect the dots. He concluded that the nightmares and his cat's strange behavior might be linked to paranormal activity tied to the old prisons. To test his theory, the professor spent a night at a nearby hotel that also allowed cats. He slept soundly, and the cat's behavior returned to normal. Ultimately, Professor V decided to cancel the rest of his stay at his Airbnb. He moved to the hotel for the duration of his renovations. Now back to present day. The professor was asked by Haunted Montreal whether he still considered himself a skeptic after the unsettling events. He responded, "My thinking has evolved. I'm now on the fence about the paranormal. But, he added, I would never admit it to anyone. To me, this feels like a great wrap to 2024. Not only is it solstice, the longest night of the year, but today is our 80th episode. It's hard to believe, honestly. The years we've been creating our videos have just flown by, and it's so cool to see the evolution we're heading towards into 2025. We've started doing investigations with other channels, like I mentioned in the last video, and we have plans to do our own here too. Plus, we're brainstorming some new series ideas to bring to you all. This was started as a passion project, and it remains such. So seeing that kind of thing being loved by people other than just myself, Dr. Mab, and the Haunted Montreal team is really cool. As we head into the new year, thank you. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who has had a strange experience at or near the Mussen Building? If so, we would love to know. As always, we want to hear your theories about what could be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If this is your first video, we do hope you'll stick around for the next one. We post new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to purchase tickets to in-person haunted storytelling tours. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll have a new video out in the new year, but until then, stay spooky.